I've always believed that some moments in life are so extraordinary, so tightly woven into the fabric of fate, that they demand to be told. My story is one of those, a tale that clings to the edges of disbelief, where survival and second chances collide in ways that feel almost scripted by some unseen hand. It's a story that begins on the day I was born, October 30, and loops back to that same day years later, marked by events so profound they've shaped every step I've taken since. I'm sharing this with you now, not just because it's my story, but because it's a testament to resilience, to the fragility of life, and to the strange, inexplicable threads that tie our days together. So, let me take you back to the beginning, to a moment when the world almost lost me before I even had a chance to know IT. IT was October 30, 26 years ago, in a small hospital room filled with the sterile hum of medical equipment and the nervous hope of my parents. I was born under a cloud of uncertainty, my tiny body carrying a burden most newborns don't, a stomach condition that refused to let me thrive. The doctors called it a congenital defect, a tangle of internal chaos that needed immediate surgery if I was to have any shot at life. My parents, young and terrified, clung to each other as they handed me over to the surgical team. I can only imagine the weight of that moment for them, watching their newborn, barely hours old, wheeled away to face a knife and a prayer. The operation was delicate, the kind where every second counts, and the outcome was far from certain. As the surgeons worked to untangle the mess inside me, something went wrong. My heart, so small and new, stopped beating. For an hour, maybe two, my parents' recounting of the timeline is hazy with grief and shock. I was gone. The doctors, with their steady hands and clinical focus, fought to bring me back, but the monitors stayed flat, the room heavy with the silence of a life slipping away. They tagged me, marked me as lost, and moved my tiny body to a cold room in the hospital, a place where the departed are kept until the paperwork catches up with the tragedy. But this is where the story takes its first impossible turn. A nurse, making her rounds through that cold, dimly lit room, heard something, a sound so faint it could have been mistaken for a draft or a distant echo. It was a cry. My cry. A baby, declared dead, was wailing in defiance of fate. She froze, her heart pounding, and ran to my side, scooping me up and sprinting to find a doctor. The hospital erupted into chaos, shouts, footsteps, the clatter of equipment as they rushed to confirm what seemed like a miracle. I was alive, my cries growing stronger, my tiny chest rising and falling against all odds. The doctors couldn't explain it, not fully. They called it a spontaneous return, a rare flicker of life, reigniting where it had been extinguished. My parents, weeping and trembling, held me close, their prayers answered in a way they'd never dared to hope. That day, October 30, became more than just my birthday. It became the day I cheated death, the day I was given a second chance before I even knew what life was. Growing up, that story was a cornerstone of my family's lore. My mom would tell it with a mix of awe and tears, my dad with a quiet pride, like he knew I was a fighter from the start. It wasn't just a tale of survival. It was a reminder of how fragile life could be, how quickly it could slip away. I carried it with me, not as a burden, but as a kind of quiet strength. I was the kid who'd come back from the edge, and that gave me a certain fearlessness. I threw myself into life, running through the neighborhood with friends, climbing trees, scraping knees, and dreaming big. School was a blur of energy and mischief. I wasn't the best student, but I was curious, always chasing the next adventure. By the time I hit my teens, I'd started working odd jobs, saving up for a beat-up car, and dreaming of a life where I could make my mark. Construction caught my eye early on. There was something about the raw, physical work, the satisfaction of building something tangible that called to me. I loved the ache in my muscles at the end of a long day, the camaraderie of the crew, the way a structure rose from nothing into something solid and real. By my early 20s, I was working full-time on a construction site, hauling materials, setting scaffolds, and learning the trade from guys who'd been at it for decades. Life was good, or at least it felt that way. I was young, strong, and full of plans. I moved out of my parents' place, rented a small apartment with a buddy, and spent my weekends hiking or grabbing beers with the crew. But there was always that date, October 30, looming in the back of my mind. Every year, as my birthday approached, my mom would call, her voice soft but insistent, reminding me to be careful. "You've already used up one miracle," she'd say, half joking, half serious. I'd laugh it off, tell her I was fine, but there was always a part of me that wondered if fate had a way of circling back. And then, 26 years later, on that very same day, October 30, it did. I was working on a 6-story building, a commercial project in the heart of the city. The site was a beast, all steel beams and concrete, with scaffolds crisscrossing the structure like a metal web. It was a crisp fall morning, the kind where the air bites at your knuckles, but the sun keeps you warm enough to work. I was under a scaffold with my coworker, Mike, a guy known for years, someone I trusted with my life on the job. We were setting up for the day, checking the supports, joking about how we'd celebrate my birthday later with a few beers. The scaffold above us was loaded with materials, steel pipes, wooden planks, tools, nothing unusual for a site like ours. But then, without warning, there was a groan, a sickening creak of metal giving way. I looked up just in time to see the whole structure buckling, collapsing like it had been kicked out from under itself. There was no time to react, no time to run. The scaffold came down, a cascade of steel and wood, and I was buried beneath it. The pain was immediate, a white-hot explosion in my back that stole my breath. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The weight pinned me to the ground, my legs trapped, my spine screaming in agony. Mike was shouting, his voice muffled by the chaos, but I could hear the panic in it. Dust filled the air, choking my lungs, and all I could think was, not today, not on my birthday. The crew scrambled, yelling for help, pulling debris off me as fast as they could. I don't know how long I was under there, minutes, maybe, though it felt like hours. When they finally freed me, I was barely conscious, my vision swimming, my body a map of pain. The paramedics arrived, their voices sharp and urgent, and I was loaded onto a stretcher, the world tilting as they rushed me to the hospital, the hospital. It was like stepping back into that cold room from my birth, only this time I was awake for it, every nerve screaming. The doctors moved fast, their faces grim as they ran scans and barked orders. My back was broken, shattered, they said. The vertebrae were a mess, and without immediate surgery, I'd lose the ability to walk, maybe worse. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling, the fluorescent lights blurring as they wheeled me into the operating room. It was October 30, my birthday, and here I was facing another surgery, another brush with the edge of life. The irony wasn't lost on me, even in my haze of pain. Twice in my life, on the same damn day, I was being cut open to be saved. The surgery was a marathon, hours of delicate work to stabilize my spine. They put in 12 screws, metal rods, a framework to hold me together where my bones couldn't. I woke up in recovery, groggy, my body heavy with the weight of what had happened. The doctors were honest. I'd walk again, but it wouldn't be easy. Running, jumping, the things I'd taken for granted, they were gone. My life, as I'd known it, was gone. But I was alive, and that was enough. I could feel my toes, could shuffle a few steps with help, and that was a victory I clung to. Reflecting on it now, as I sit here telling you this, I can't help but feel the weight of those 2 days, both October 30s, book into my life so far. There's something almost cosmic about it, like the universe decided to test me twice on the same date, to see if I'd fight my way through. And I did. I'm here 26 years later, walking, slowly, carefully, but walking. The screws in my spine are a constant reminder, a metal map of survival etched into my body. I can't run anymore, can't leap off a curb or climb a mountain like I used to, but I'm here, breathing, living, telling you this story. And that's what hooks me, what keeps me going, the idea that life, no matter how fragile, no matter how many times it tries to break you, is worth fighting for. I don't know what it means, not really. Some might call it fate, others coincidence. Maybe it's just the strange poetry of life, the way certain days carry more weight than others. All I know is that October 30 is my day, not just for being born, but for being reborn twice over. And as I move forward, limping but alive, I carry that with me, a story that's as much about survival as it is about the will to keep going, no matter what. The hospital room was a cocoon of beeps and whispers, a place where time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. I lay there, my body heavy with the weight of anesthesia and the 12 screws now anchoring my spine. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over everything. My bandaged torso, the fluid dripping into my arm, the concerned faces of my parents who had rushed to my side. It was still October 30, my 26th birthday, and the irony of facing another life-altering surgery on this day wasn't lost on me. I'd been here before, in a way, as a newborn fighting for my first breaths. Now I was fighting for a different kind of survival, one where walking, not just living, was the prize. The doctors had been clear. The surgery was a success, but the road ahead would be brutal. My spine was held together by metal, a fragile framework that demanded I relearn what it meant to move, to exist in this body that felt both mine and foreign. As I stared at the ceiling, my mind churned with questions. Why me? Why this day? And most importantly, what now? The first days in the hospital were a blur of pain and patience. The nurses moved with quiet efficiency, checking my vitals, adjusting my bed, offering small encouragements that felt like lifelines. My parents were there every moment they could be, my mom's eyes red from crying, my dad's hand steady on my shoulder. They didn't talk much about the accident, not at first. It was too raw, too close to the story of my birth they'd told me so many times. Instead, they filled the silence with stories of my childhood, how I'd climb anything that stood still long enough, how I'd always been stubborn, refusing to give up even when I fell. You've always been a fighter, my mom said, her voice cracking. I wanted to believe her, but the pain in my back, sharp and relentless even with the meds, made it hard to see past the moment. The doctors came in daily, their clipboard a constant presence. They explained the damage in clinical terms: multiple fractured vertebrae, a spinal cord that had narrowly escaped worse injury, and the hardware now holding it all together. You're lucky, they said, a word that fell hollow when I couldn't sit up without help. Lucky meant I could feel my toes, could wiggle them slightly under the thin hospital blanket. Lucky meant I wasn't paralyzed, though the possibility had been terrifyingly real. They outlined the recovery plan: weeks in the hospital, months of physical therapy, a lifetime of limitations. No running, no jumping, no heavy lifting. The life I'd built, construction, hiking, the physical freedom I'd taken for granted, was gone. I'd have to start over, rebuild not just my body, but my entire sense of self. Those early days were a test of endurance. The pain was a constant companion, flaring with every small movement. Getting out of bed was a production, a slow dance of nurses and pulleys and gritted teeth. I'd lie there afterward, exhausted, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I'd ever feel normal again. My coworker, Mike, visited a few days after the surgery, his face pale and drawn. He'd been under the scaffold with me when it collapsed, but he'd walked away with just bruises and a cut on his arm. "I thought we lost you," he said, his voice low. He told me how the crew had worked frantically to pull the debris off me, how the air had been thick with dust and panic. He didn't say much about the scaffold itself. There'd be an investigation later, questions about safety protocols and structural failures, but his eyes carried the weight of what we'd both survived. I wanted to ask him why it happened, why the scaffold gave way, but I couldn't find the words. Not yet. The hospital became my world, its rhythms dictating my days. Mornings started with the clatter of breakfast trays and the soft footsteps of nurses. Physical therapy began almost immediately, even before I could stand. A therapist named Sarah, with a no-nonsense attitude and a warm smile, guided me through gentle exercises, flexing my ankles, lifting my arms, anything to keep my muscles from atrophying. "Small steps," she'd say, her hands steady as she helped me move. "Every movement is progress." I clung to her words, even when they felt like empty promises. The first time I sat up on my own, maybe a week after the surgery, it felt like climbing a mountain. My back screamed, my head spun, but I did it. My parents were there, cheering like I'd just won a marathon. It was a small victory, but in that moment, it felt, as the days turned into weeks, I started to notice the little things, the way the sunlight slanted through the window in the afternoon, the way my mom's laugh could fill the room, the way the hospital coffee tasted like burnt regret. I began to talk more, not just about the accident, but about everything. My fears, my hopes, the strange coincidence of it all happening on my birthday. My parents listened, their faces a mix of relief and worry. They told me again about the day I was born, how they'd thought they'd lost me then too. "You've got a knack for scaring us," my dad said, trying to lighten the mood. But there was a truth in his words that settled deep in my chest. Twice now, on October 30, I'd faced death and come out the other side. It wasn't just a coincidence anymore. It was a pattern, a rhythm to my life I couldn't ignore. The hospital staff became like family. There was Nurse Jenny, who snuck me extra pudding cups and told me stories about her kids. Dr. Patel, the surgeon who'd put my spine back together, checked in regularly, his calm demeanor a steadying force. Even the janitor, Mr. Rodriguez, would stop by to chat, his jokes about the hospital food breaking through my darker moments. They all knew my story, not just the accident, but the one from my birth. It spread through the hospital like wildfire, whispered in break rooms and hallways. The kid who came back twice, they called me, half in awe, half in jest. I didn't mind. It made me feel like I was part of something bigger, like my survival meant something beyond just me. But there were dark days too. Days when the pain was too much, when the thought of never running again felt like a betrayal of who I was. I'd lie awake at night, the hospital quiet except for the occasional beep or cough, and I'd replay the accident in my head. The creak of the scaffold, the weight crashing down, the moment I realized I couldn't move. I wonder what I could have done differently if I'd missed some warning sign. The investigation was ongoing, but early reports pointed to a faulty support beam, a manufacturing defect that no one had caught. It wasn't my fault, or Mike's, or even the crew's, but that didn't stop the guilt from creeping in. I've been so confident, so sure of my place on that site. Now, I wasn't sure of anything. Physical therapy became my battleground. Sarah pushed me harder each week, her encouragement laced with tough love. "You're not fragile," she'd say when I hesitated. "Your body's been through hell, but it's still yours. Own it." We started with small movements, sitting, standing, shuffling a few steps with a walker. Every session left me drained, my muscles trembling, but there was a fire in me that refused to go out. I thought about my parents, about the nurse who'd heard my cry all those years ago, about the fact that I was still here against all odds. I wasn't going to let this break me, not when I'd already beaten death twice. That'd be by the time I was discharged. Nearly a month after the accident, I could walk short distances with a cane. It wasn't graceful. My steps were slow, deliberate, each one a negotiation with my spine, but it was progress. The hospital staff lined up to say goodbye, their smiles a mix of pride and relief. Sarah gave me a hug, her voice firm as she said, "Keep fighting. You got this." My parents drove me home, the city blurring past the car window. My apartment felt different when I stepped inside, like it belonged to someone else. The couch where I'd sprawled after long days on the site, the hiking boots by the door, the weights in the corner, they were relics of a life I couldn't return to. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The first weeks at home were a different kind of challenge. My parents stayed with me, helping with meals and errands, but I hated feeling like a burden. I spent hours researching my injury, reading about spinal fusions and recovery rates, trying to understand what my new normal would be. The internet was a mixed bag, stories of people who'd regained near full mobility, others who never walked again. I chose to focus on the former, clinging to their stories like lifelines. I started outpatient physical therapy, working with a new therapist named Mark who specialized in spinal injuries. He was relentless, pushing me to stretch my limits while reminding me to listen to my body. "You're not just healing bones," he said. "You're rebuilding trust in yourself." Trust was hard to come by. I'd always been the guy who could handle anything, carry heavy loads, climb scaffolds, take risks without blinking. Now, every step felt like a gamble. I catch myself hesitating before standing, second-guessing my balance. But there were moments of hope too. The first time I walked across my apartment without the cane, my mom clapped like I was a kid taking his first steps. The first time I managed to tie my own shoes, I laughed out loud, the sound surprising even me. These were small victories, but they stacked up, building a foundation I could stand on. I started talking to Mike more, checking in over the phone since he was back on the site. He told me the crew had dedicated a bench to me at the construction site, a quiet nod to what we'd been through. The investigation had wrapped up, confirming the faulty beam as the cause. There were lawsuits pending, talk of compensation, but I didn't care about that. I just wanted to understand why it happened, why it had to be me, and why it had to be October 30. Mike didn't have answers, but he listened, and that was enough. He told me the crew missed me, that the site didn't feel the same without my bad jokes and endless energy. "You'll be back," he said, but we both knew it wasn't true. Not in the way it used to be. As the months passed, I settled into a new rhythm. Physical therapy was a constant, 3 times a week, each session a mix of pain and progress. I started writing, something I'd never done before, jotting down my thoughts about the accident, my recovery, the strange symmetry of my life. It was therapeutic, a way to process the questions that kept me up at night. Why did I survive? Not once, but twice. What was I supposed to do with this second chance, this third chance? I didn't have answers, but putting the words on paper helped me feel like I was moving towards something. Even if I didn't know what did, I also started connecting with others who'd been through similar injuries. Online forums became a lifeline, a place where I could share my fears and triumphs with people who understood. There was a guy named Chris, a former athlete who'd broken his back in a car accident. He told me how he'd learned to find joy in new ways, writing, painting, coaching kids. "You don't have to be who you were," he said. "You just have to be who you are now." His words stuck with me, a reminder that my life wasn't over, just different. Why parents eventually went back to their own lives, though they called daily their voices a steady anchor. I leaned on my friends too, the ones who showed up with pizza and bad movies, who didn't treat me like I was fragile. They reminded me of who I was beneath the screws and scars, the guy who laughed too loud, who always had a story to tell. And I had one hell of a story now. I started sharing it, first with friends, then with strangers online. I posted about it on a forum, not expecting much, but the responses poured in. People moved by my survival, by the strange poetry of October 30. They called me resilient, a miracle, a fighter. I didn't feel like any of those things, not always, but their words gave me something to aim for. By the time spring rolled around, I was walking without the cane most days. My steps were still careful, my back a constant reminder of its limits, but I was moving. I started taking short walks around my neighborhood, feeling the sun on my face, the ground solid beneath me. Each step was a small rebellion against the accident, against the idea that my life was defined by what I'd lost. I wasn't the construction guy anymore, not in the way I'd been, but I was something else. Someone still figuring it out, but someone alive, someone fighting. Looking back, those months after the hospital were about more than just healing my body. They were about rebuilding my sense of purpose, my belief in what was possible. October 30 had marked me twice, not just with scars, but with a kind of clarity. Life was fragile, unpredictable, but it was also stubborn, like me. I've been given 2 chances, 3, if you count the fact that I'm still here, telling you this. And I'm not done yet. There's a fire in me, fueled by those 2 days, by the cries in a cold room and the collapse of a scaffold. It's a fire that says I'm here, I'm alive, and I'm going to keep going no matter what. The spring air carried a promise of renewal. But for me, it was a reminder of how far I'd come and how much further I had to go. It was 6 months since the accident, 6 months since October 30 had once again redefined my life. I was walking now, not with the easy stride of my old self, but with a deliberate rhythm, each step a quiet victory over the 12 screws in my spine. My apartment, once a shrine to my old life with its hiking boots and construction gear, was starting to feel like home again, though it was a different kind of home. One shaped by adaptation, by acceptance, by a stubborn refusal to let my story end under that collapsed scaffold. As I sit here, telling you this final piece of my journey so far, I want you to feel the weight of it, The way each moment has built on the last, pushing me toward a future I'm still carving out. This isn't just about surviving. It's about what you do with the life you're given, especially when it's been handed back to you not once, but twice. The transition from hospital to home had been jarring, but by spring, I'd found a new kind of normal. Physical therapy with Mark was relentless. 3 sessions a week that left me sore, but stronger. He'd push me to walk farther, lift light weights, stretch my limits while reminding me not to overdo it. Your spine's a machine now, he'd say, tapping his own back like it was a blueprint. Respect it, but don't baby it. I took his words to heart, using them to fuel my progress. The cane was gone most days, replaced by a careful confidence in my steps. I could make it to the corner store and back, a 10-minute walk that felt like a marathon. My neighbors started to recognize me, offering waves or quick chats about the weather. It was mundane, but it was life, real, tangible life, and I soaked it up. Why parents, though back in their own routine, were a constant presence. They'd call every evening, their voices a mix of pride and worry. My mom would ask about my therapy, my dad about my plans. "You're not going back to construction, are you?" he'd say, his tone light, but laced with concern. I didn't have an answer for him. Not yet. Construction had been my identity, my way of proving I could build something solid in a world that felt shaky. Losing that wasn't just about losing a job. It was losing a piece of who I was. But I was starting to see that I could build something else, something new. I just didn't know what. Writing became my outlet, a way to process the chaos of the past 6 months. I'd started jotting down my thoughts in the hospital, but now it was a ritual. Every morning, I'd sit at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, better than the hospital's burnt regret, and write. I wrote about the accident, the pain, the fear, but also the small victories, the first step without a cane, the first laugh that didn't hurt. I wrote about October 30, that cursed and blessed day that seemed to hold my life in its grip. The words poured out, raw and unpolished, but they felt like mine. I started sharing them online, on forums and social media, not expecting much, but hoping to connect. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of messages from strangers who saw themselves in my story, who'd faced their own brushes with loss or reinvention. They called me inspiring, which felt strange, but their words gave me purpose. Maybe my story wasn't just mine. Maybe it was something I could give to others. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Lisa, a former nurse who'd worked in a trauma unit. She'd read my post about my birth, about the nurse who heard my cry in that cold room 26 years ago. "That story gives me chills," she wrote. "I've seen miracles in my career, but yours is something else. Keep telling it." Her words hit me hard, not just because of the encouragement, but because they reminded me of the nurse who'd saved me. I'd never known her name, never had a chance to thank her. I started to wonder if I could find her, if I could close that loop from my first October 30. It felt like a long shot, but it gave me something to chase, something beyond the daily grind of therapy and recovery. I reached out to the hospital where I was born, a small community place that hadn't changed much in 26 years. The records department was kind but cautious, citing privacy laws and faded memories. They couldn't give me a name, but they promised to pass along a letter if I wrote one. So I did. I poured my heart into it, thanking the unknown nurse for her quick thinking, for hearing a cry that no one else did. I didn't know if it would reach her, but it felt like a step toward understanding my own story. That letter was the first time I'd really grappled with the weight of my survival, not just as a fact, but as a gift. I mailed it off, a small act of gratitude that felt bigger than it looked. Meanwhile, my physical progress was steady but slow. Mark introduced new exercises, balance drills, core strengthening, things to rebuild the muscles around my spine. Each session was a battle, not just against pain, but against doubt. There were days when I'd stumble, when my back would seize up, and I'd wonder if I'd ever be more than this. More than a guy who could walk but not run, who could lift a grocery bag but not a steel beam. Mark saw it in my face, those moments of frustration, and he'd push harder. "You're not defined by what you can't do," he'd say. "You're defined by what you choose to do." I started to believe him, not because it was easy, but because I had to. The alternative, giving up, wasn't an option. Not after everything that MY friends were a lifeline, showing up with their chaotic energy and unwavering support. They'd drag me out to the park for picnics, ignoring my protests that I couldn't keep up. They'd tease me about my slow walk, calling me grandpa, but they'd wait for me, matching my pace without complaint. One night, over pizza and cheap beer, my buddy Jake asked what I wanted to do next. "You can't swing a hammer anymore," he said, blunt as always. "But you're still you. What's the plan?" I didn't have an answer, but the question stuck with me. I've been so focused on surviving, on walking again, that I hadn't thought much about the future. Construction was out, but maybe there was something else, something I could build with my mind, my words, my story that I started exploring options, tentative at first. I took an online course in writing, learning to shape my thoughts into something more polished. It wasn't easy, my grammar was rough, my patience thinner than I'd like, but it felt right. I wrote about my life, about the accident, about the strange symmetry of October 30. I started a blog, nothing fancy, just a place to share my story and connect with others. The response was humbling. People from all over, some with their own injuries, some just moved by the idea of second chances. I got emails from a teenager who'd survived a car crash, a mom whose son was in rehab for a spinal injury, even a guy who'd worked construction and wanted to talk safety reforms. My story was becoming a bridge, a way to reach others, and that gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since the site. The investigation into the accident wrapped up around this time. The final report confirmed what we'd suspected: a faulty support beam, a manufacturing defect that had slipped through inspections. There were settlements, compensation offered to cover medical bills and lost wages, but it didn't feel like justice. It couldn't give me back my old life, couldn't erase the pain or the scars. I met with a lawyer, a sharp woman named Maria, who walked me through my options. "You've got a case," she said, "but more than that, you've got a voice. Use it." Her words echoed Mark's, Lisa's, even my own thoughts. I didn't want to just sue and move on. I wanted to make sure this didn't happen to someone else. I started talking to Mike and the crew, gathering their stories, their frustrations with the industry's lax safety standards. Maybe I couldn't swing a hammer anymore, but I could write, I could speak, I could push for change. By summer, I was walking longer distances, up to a mile some days. My neighborhood felt alive again, the trees heavy with leaves, kids playing in the streets, the hum of life all around me. I'd stop at the coffee shop down the block, chatting with the barista, a guy named Sam who'd started calling me Miracle Man after hearing my story. I didn't mind the nickname. It was better than the kid who came back twice. I was starting to feel like myself again, not the old me, but a new version, one who was learning to live with limitations but also with possibilities. I'd sit at the shop, writing on my laptop, watching the world go by, feeling like I was part of it again. One day, out of the blue, I got a response from the hospital about my letter. It wasn't from the nurse herself, but from a retired staff member who'd worked there 26 years ago. She didn't know the nurse's name. Records from that time were spotty, but she remembered the story, remembered the baby who'd come back. "It was the talk of the hospital for weeks," she wrote. "We all felt like we'd witnessed something special." Her letter was short, but it hit me hard. It was proof that my story had rippled beyond my family, that it had mattered to others even then. I kept writing, kept sharing, kept searching for that nurse, not because I needed closure, but because I wanted to honor her part of my life. My blog started to gain traction, enough that a local news outlet reached out for an interview. I was nervous, but I said yes. They came to my apartment, set up cameras, and asked me to tell my story from the beginning. I talked about my birth, the cold room, the nurse's cry. I talked about the scaffold, the pain, the recovery. I talked about October 30, how it felt like a day that owned me, that shaped me. The reporter, a woman with kind eyes, listened intently, asking questions that made me dig deeper. When the piece aired, I watched it with my parents, my heart pounding. Seeing myself on screen, hearing my own voice tell my story, was surreal, but it was also empowering. The response was overwhelming. More messages, more stories, more people reaching out to say I'd given them hope. That interview led to more opportunities. A community group asked me to speak at a safety awareness event, focusing on construction accidents. I said yes, despite the nerves. Standing in front of a small crowd, my cane tucked out of sight, I told my story again, this time with a purpose. I talked about the need for better inspections, better training, better care for workers. I saw heads nod, saw tears in some eyes, and felt a spark of something new. Impact. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was making a difference. However small the AS fall approached, bringing October 30 closer, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. It was my 27th birthday, the first since the accident, and I didn't know what to expect. Would the day carry another twist of fate, another test? I decided to face it head on, not with fear, but with gratitude. I planned a small gathering with my parents, my friends, even Mike and a few guys from the crew. We met at the park, the same one where I'd taken my first post-accident walks. There was food, laughter, music, a celebration of life, not just mine, but all of ours. My mom brought a cake, and when I blew out the candles, I didn't wish for anything. I didn't need to. I was here, surrounded by people who loved me, telling a story that was still unfolding. That night, alone in my apartment, I sat down to write again. I wrote about the years since the accident, about the pain and the progress, about the way October 30 had become my anchor, my reminder to keep going. I wrote about the nurse, the scaffold, the screws in my spine. I wrote about the people who'd carried me through, my parents, my friends, Mark, Lisa, even strangers online. My story wasn't finished, not by a long shot. There were still questions about my future, about the nurse, about what October 30 would mean next. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd survived twice, rebuilt myself piece by piece, and I was ready for whatever came next. Looking back, this year has been about more than recovery. It's been about redefining what it means to live, to fight, to matter. October 30 isn't just a date. It's a promise, a challenge, a gift. It's the day I was born, the day I came back, the day I was broken and remade. And as I sit here telling you this, I know one thing for sure. I'm not done. There's a fire in me, stoked by those 2 days, by the cries and the crashes, by the people who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. It's a fire that says I'm here, I'm alive, and I'm going to keep telling this story because it's not just mine, it's ours. From this incident, I learned the fragility and resilience of life. Twice on October 30, I faced death, first as a newborn, then in a catastrophic accident, and both times I survived against the odds. It taught me that survival isn't just about luck. It's about fighting through pain, adapting to loss, and finding purpose in the aftermath. The unwavering support of family, friends, and even strangers showed me the power of connection, while the act of sharing my story revealed how vulnerability can inspire others. October 30 became a symbol of second chances, reminding me to embrace each day with gratitude and to keep pushing forward, no matter the obstacles.